Namo Avalokitaya. Hello, dear YouTube Sangha, and welcome to episode 4, Dispelling Individualism. In this episode, I will discuss what I consider the harm of egoism from a Buddhist perspective. Did you hear about the Buddhist monk who went to the doctor? He was diagnosed with too much ego. The doctor told him, "Don't worry, it's just a phase. No need to attach to it." Funny? No? Okay, well, before I begin this video, I must provide a disclaimer, as I've been thinking on the irony of this series and how it must seem hypocritical in some way. I do not seek fame or praise from sharing these thoughts. Rather, I wish to offer these ideas for those who choose to listen, as they may find value in them. I trust your freedom of choice to discern what you might find helpful or fruitful in your life. I offer these teachings not as a doctrine or ideology, but as a way of understanding the nature of suffering and liberation from it. Well, with that out of the way, I think we have time for one more joke. Why don't Buddhists ever make good stand-up comedians? Because they don't believe in self-promotion. Okay, let's get on with it. The Buddha, over 2 millennia ago, pointed to the fundamental cause of human suffering as clinging to the self, our deeply ingrained attachment to the notion of the ego or self. In modern times, individualism and egoism have become dominant cultural forces, especially in Western societies like the United States, where the notion of the self-made person is glorified. While individualism can sometimes be a force for good, the egotistic tendencies it fosters can lead to divisiveness, selfishness, and a lack of true compassion. From a Buddhist perspective, these tendencies are harmful, not just to the individual, but to society as a whole. By cultivating mindfulness or samasati, loving kindness, metta, and wisdom, prajna, we can dissolve the barriers that separate us and create a more just and compassionate world. In his teachings, the Buddha repeatedly emphasized that the self is not the solid, permanent entity that we think it is. He taught that the 5 aggregates, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, are constantly in flux, and that clinging to them as me and mine leads to suffering or dukkha. In his seminal discourse, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the discourse on the not-self characteristic, the Buddha explains that the belief in a permanent, independent self is one of the key causes of suffering. When we attach to an idea of the self, we create divisions between me and you, between us and them, and between self and other. This leads to a sense of alienation and fear, which feeds into egoism. The ego, or self-centeredness, is not simply desire for personal gain. It can also manifest as a desire for recognition, status, or the need to be seen as special in the eyes of others. This craving for validation can drive us to seek praise, power, or fame, often at the expense of others. This kind of thinking is widespread in modern society, where individual achievement is often celebrated above all else. The Buddha, however, offered an alternative. Instead of clinging to the ego, he encouraged non-attachment and the cultivation of virtues, such as generosity or dana, ethical conduct, sila, and wisdom, prajna. Buddhism teaches that by overcoming the illusion of the self, we can free ourselves from the cycles of craving and aversion that lead to suffering. When we stop identifying so strongly with our ego, we become less defensive, less possessive, and more open to the needs and experiences of others. One might wonder, how can these Buddhist principles be applied to American values? In many ways, the core teachings of the Buddha, non attachment, compassion, and wisdom, align with the ideals of equality, justice, and service that are central to American democracy. The Buddha's emphasis on compassion, or karuna, and loving kindness, metta, can support efforts to promote social justice, equality, and community welfare. In fact, many of the American values that emphasize individual rights and freedoms can coexist with and even be enriched by a greater focus on the collective well being. For example, if we take a step back from the ego and the need to win or be right, we create space for dialogue and cooperation, essential components for a harmonious society. Thich Nhat Hanh, renowned Vietnamese Buddhist monk, often spoke about the importance of interbeing, the interconnectedness of all beings. He explained, "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness." This is an antidote to the deepening polarization in society, where people are divided into competing factions based on race, class, or political ideology. By cultivating an awareness of our shared humanity, we can foster a more compassionate and inclusive society. A key practice in Buddhism that helps us overcome the ego is metta bhavana, or loving kindness meditation. This practice involves cultivating feelings of goodwill, kindness, and love toward all beings, starting with ourselves and extending outward to friends, acquaintances, strangers, and even those we find difficult to love. By focusing on developing love and compassion rather than the desire to be better or above others, we gradually dissolve the ego's need for recognition and special status. Rather than aspiring to be a hero, Metta Bhavana teaches us to be calm, caring, and helpful, qualities that are far more heroic than any external accolade. As Bhikkhu Bodhi, a prominent American monk, wrote, "The most heroic act is not to conquer the world, but to conquer oneself." True heroism, from a Buddhist perspective, is found in the act of transcending ego and cultivating a heart of compassion that seeks the well being of all. One of the most pressing challenges in modern society is the ego's influence on justice and politics. The pursuit of power, influence, and control often leads to unfair practices, corruption, and a disregard for the well being of others. The Buddha's teachings suggest that the ego should be removed from the justice system and political processes to create a more just society. Here I have the Dhammapada, and it reads, "Not by passing arbitrary judgments does a man become just. A wise man is he who investigates both right and wrong, he who does not judge others arbitrarily, but passes judgment impartially according to the truth. That sagacious man, or person, woman, whatever you would prefer, is a guardian of law and is called just." Okay. Imagine a justice system that is not driven by personal gain or the desire for vengeance, but instead guided by a commitment to truth, fairness, and compassion. By removing ego from political decisions, leaders would act with genuine concern for the welfare of the people rather than self-interest. A political landscape grounded in these values would foster cooperation, reduce division, and create opportunities for healing and reconciliation. In many fields, from medicine to engineering to research, experts provide much needed wisdom in society. In Buddhism, wisdom, or prajna, is the capacity to see things as they truly are, free from the distortions of ego and attachment. When experts approach their work with humility, recognizing that their knowledge is not an extension of their ego, they can better serve the greater good. Whether it's a doctor diagnosing a patient or an engineer designing a bridge, the goal should be to serve others rather than to alleviate one's own status. Shinran, a Japanese Buddhist teacher, emphasized the importance of recognizing our inherent limitations and relying on wisdom beyond our ego. He said, "True wisdom is to know that we are ignorant." This is an important reminder for all those in positions of expertise. No one has all the answers, and the ego's need to prove oneself often clouds judgment. When we act with prajna, we act for the benefit of others, not for personal gain. And one of my Vietnamese friends often says, wisdom without compassion leads to Hitler, and compassion without wisdom, well, leads to being foolish. So, there's a marriage between compassion and wisdom in Buddhism. From a Buddhist perspective, individualism and egoism are harmful not just because they create personal suffering, but because they divide us from others and perpetuate a cycle of competition, greed, and self-centeredness. By cultivating compassion, loving kindness, and wisdom, we can break free from the constraints of the ego and create a more just and peaceful world, starting with the self. Whether in the justice system, politics, or daily life, taking the ego out of our actions can lead to profound transformation. As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. Let us therefore cultivate thoughts of kindness, humility, and wisdom, creating a world that reflects these values. Well, dear Sangha, if you like this video or if you have any questions, please leave a like and comments. And if you want to see more from this series, please subscribe. I will be making more content, not just this series, but in any case, I look forward to seeing you guys again. And until next time, if you made it this far, sadhu 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 to you.